Off the ball. This is News Talk.
Okay, welcome back. So it's 1-1 between Austria and North Macedonia, 39 minutes on the clock. The latest in the GA, I suppose the developing story is that Monaghan and Galway will go to extra time after drawing in Clonus. That's to secure their Division 1 status for next year. We'll be keeping a close eye on that game with Dermot Blake there for us. And we should turn back to the football. We've had Mark Lawrenson on reviewing the games. Philip O'Connor was in Copenhagen covering the game for Reuters, I think, Philip, when the most unexpected turn happened on about 42 minutes. Absolutely incredible. You were in the stadium as a journalist. Sometimes journalists have a screen in front of them, sometimes they don't. What was your perspective in the stadium on the whole situation?
Yeah, it was the strangest, most shocking night that I've ever been involved in. I was sitting there sort of looking down, in parking the press box is fairly high. So I was looking down at that sideline. And, you know, as you were saying, sometimes you have the screen there, sometimes you're typing away. But I was just looking at the incident as it happened. And it's a fairly innocuous throw-in. So, you know, these things happen in the game the whole time. Eriksen moves towards the ball and he goes down. And you think this is not right. Okay, there's nobody ran into him. There's no clash of heads. There's nobody tripped him. Nothing happened there. And all of a sudden he's on the ground. And straight away, if you look at all these big games at the Champions League and internationals, you'll have photographers not just behind the goals and kind of a little bit along the sidelines, but also up in what they call the tribune, just in front of the press box there. And there's probably 6 or 7 photographers. And the guy I was working with, a German photographer called Wolfgang Lotte, was standing right in front of me. So I was able to get down to him very quickly, and he was able to show me to zoom in on this massive, you know, almost paparazzi lens that he has. And that was the point when I saw Christian's eyes open and he was basically lying on the ground, more or less lifeless. And I had to basically run back up and then prepare the news flash and tell the world what was going on there. And from there, it was just surreal. The whole thing, you know, stretching out over an hour, almost 2 hours long. The whole thing was just surreal.
Yeah. As you say, the way that ball bounced off his knee, and even his few steps in the lead up to that ball bouncing off his knee, just so incongruous to what we see these top level athletes do all the time. It was obvious something was seriously wrong then.
Yeah. I mean, this is a guy who, back in 2011, I came down here to cover a game. England were coming down here to play Denmark. I think it was in February that time. It was quite cold. And nobody was talking about Christian Eriksen. Nobody outside of Scandinavia was talking about him. So the English journalists arrived. And yet, that night, he owned the show. He ran the whole show at the age of 19. And exactly as you're saying there, like, you know, his thing is his touch, his control, the fact that he knows what's going to happen on the pitch long before anybody else does, because he's the man that's going to create it. And to see him do something that looked so clumsy, it was just, you know, it just did not belong there whatsoever. And then when he collapsed onto the pitch, it was very, very obvious to me what was after happening. Now, you never want to go make predictions. You never want to say, oh, I think it's a heart problem. And even now, I still wouldn't say that, because, you know, the tests are coming back and they're saying that everything looks okay so far. So it's very difficult to say what it was. But when you see the players around him, when you see Joachim Mahler, who was the left back, the number 5 yesterday, and then you see Simon Kjær, the Danish team captain, Thomas Delaney, the number 8, who plays for Borussia Dortmund, you know, these guys are all tough guys. And when you see them, Martin Braithwaite from Barcelona, when you see these guys get upset, and when you see them, you know, sort of beckoning for people to come in as quickly as possible, you know that there's something wrong there, because nobody knows better than footballers, you know, when guys are faking or when something is serious. But it was Kjær who was the one who reacted quickest. Now, I kind of looked away because I had to go and send that news flash. And when I looked back down then, I still wasn't looking at the screen. When I looked back down then, I could just see 2 hands on Christian's chest, and they were just sort of pumping away there. And I thought, shit, this is some sort of heart stoppage. This is a disaster. And I honestly thought, from the picture I'd seen that Wolfgang had showed me previously, that I thought, you know, he may have even been dead before he hit the floor. But as it turned out then, they were calling the medics to come on there, and the medics were on the far sidelines. They were just under where we were in the press box, and Christian was lying prone on the far sideline. So they started to run on and do their work. But at that point then, I actually did look at the screen, and I didn't get upset until I saw Thomas Delaney's face, because, like I say, I've seen Thomas Delaney kick fellas out of stadiums. He's an extremely good footballer, but he's one of the toughest men I know. A really lovely guy, but when he crosses that white line, he's tough. And he was in pieces. He was distraught. Yusuf Poulsen, who started at centre forward yesterday, he was the same way. You know, these are professionals. These are tough men. And seeing them upset got me upset. And it took me about, you know, a good 10 or 15 minutes. I was sitting there trying to write, and my hands were shaking, because we literally did not know how this was going to go.
Yeah. A few people have made the observation I had as well, which is that I know you're saying they're tough men, but in a lot of instances, for me, they went from tough footballers and morphed back into the very, very young men they were. A few of them suddenly looked like boys a little bit in over their heads. And the TV footage, rightly or wrongly, caught some of the CPR being administered. And then the white sheets going up, and it was just for privacy, of course it was, but they were just so reminiscent of the white screens that go up at a horse track when a horse is being put down. And obviously that was not what was happening, but your mind just makes those connections, and it just felt like we were watching the worst possible thing unfold before our eyes. So I'm curious, in so much as you can, remember the atmosphere in the stadium, because I don't remember the noise in the stadium or otherwise, and sometimes microphones can distort the actuality, but you were there. What was going on in the stadium amongst the fans?
It was incredible because it wasn't completely silent, and yet it felt like it was. So there was a murmur going around. It was like people didn't want to put words on what it was that they were seeing. And I just remember losing all sense of time. I couldn't tell you whether I was sitting there for 2 hours or 5 hours or a week. I couldn't tell you, this happened, it was the 42nd minute of the game, and then it took a half an hour for this to happen. Can't remember any of that. I remember this very low murmur, and I started to look at the stands and to see what people were doing. People were hugging each other, people were crying, people had their hands in their mouths, they were chewing their nails, there was this sort of constant murmur, but it was almost like they couldn't put words on what it was they were seeing. And there was no information happening, so that nobody was being told anything over the tannoy system. Everybody knew. So where Christian was lying, there was a sort of a knot of Finnish fans at the corner of that stand and behind the goal where that took place. So it was mostly Finnish fans were there, but everybody knew who was down. Everybody knew what was going on. And when the sheets came out, I likened last night when I was writing about it to, in a Hollywood movie, when you see the detective comes along to the murder victim, and it's that kind of white sheet that's pulled over them. And that, that really frightened so many people, because it's an operational thing. You want to be able to work in private, and the Danish team doctor said that today. And that was where, I remember tweeting at the time, I think that, I was so glad that Kasper Schmeichel was there, and in particular that Simon Kjær was there. So Simon is just one of those guys. He's over 30, I think. He's playing at Milan now. He's played in Fenerbahce. He's played in Spain. He's played all over the place. And he's just... He comes across, and not to be macho about it, but he comes across as a man. He's a man who does things. If he sees something that he's doing, he'll go and do it. And he was the one who was seen comforting Sabrina, Christian Eriksen's partner. He was the one seen sort of, organising the lads into the ring around things. He was one of the few who actually faced towards Christian when he was receiving treatment, while the rest faced away. The rest couldn't look, but Simon was okay. And at the same time as he was doing all the right things, it absolutely shattered him to see his friend lying on the ground like that, would, sort of swaying between life and death. So when they came back out, I suppose we'll get to how the game actually came to be played at all after that. But when they came back out, Simon took his place at centre-back again. And, I've seen him have tremendous duels with Zlatan Ibrahimovic over the years in qualifiers and that. Again, just a fantastic player. Never takes a step down from anybody. And just as, they played the last 5 minutes of the first half, and then they had a 5-minute break, and then they went into the second half. And, I can't tell you exactly how long it was into the second half, but Simon just had enough. And he went to Kasper Hjulmand, the Danish manager, and said, "You got to take me out of here. I can't do this." So mentally, he wasn't there anymore. And Kasper said as much. But at that stage, the game didn't matter. Football didn't matter. Simon Kjær was, the man of the night for me. I think UEFA has said in a very sentimental fashion that Christian Eriksen was the star of the game. He wasn't. Simon Kjær was the man who saved absolutely everything to me last night.
So I didn't really fully appreciate that, because the game was so secondary, and obviously I think Belgium were playing and other stuff was going on, and there was GAA here. I was trying to keep track and everything. So, because I didn't think the game should have been continued that evening. There was no need for that to happen. The midday option was good. That should have been insisted upon by a more dispassionate onlooker, someone at UEFA, just come in and take the decision out of the player's hands. So Simon Kjær, who was so, I guess, pragmatic when the situation was unfolding, he did turn and almost request to be taken off during the game.
Yeah. He said he was done. He said he couldn't, he was, I think, that he deeply affected or deeply troubled by it, is what they said in Danish last night when they were talking about it. So he couldn't keep his mind on the game.
That goes to show, Philip, it is crazy that someone didn't step in and say, go back to the hotel, talk to some counsellors if you want, have some food, get a night's sleep, come back. It's a big game in all your lives. Play it tomorrow at midday. It does show, like, the players would have felt a certain pressure to almost step up to the plate, do it for Christian, answer their country's call, whatever. Once the option was there to continue, I think players would have felt it was a certain act of, not cowardice, but almost giving in to not play the game that evening, when there was no need for that to happen.
Well, I think Michael Laudrup said it best when he said UEFA offered them a choice that wasn't a choice at all.
Yes.
You had the choice of going back out there, finishing the game, or coming back at 12 o'clock today. Now, the more that comes out about it, the Danes, I went out to the Danish team hotel this morning. It's out in Marienlyst, which is a little bit north of Copenhagen, maybe 40, 45 kilometres in the town of Helsingør, where Hamlet is set. And it was amazing to be thinking that we could be going out there to see Hamlet without the Prince in terms of the Danish team. But we went out there and they said there was going to be a press conference at 10 o'clock. And we were basically chased off the grounds. They said, no, there's no press conference. Sure. And we came back and then they said there was going to be a press conference at 3 o'clock this afternoon, Central European time. And then they started to speak about that and how Christian was conscious. And he was communicative when they took him off the pitch. So, he was actually conscious when he took him off the pitch. And then they took him to the hospital. Now, Rick's Hospital is only around the corner. It's easier to walk there than it is to drive there from the ground. Not that Christian was in any fit state to walk, of course. But apparently then he FaceTimed the team and he spoke to the guys. And he was more worried. This is what they said today, was that he was more worried about them, perhaps, than they were about him. And he was going, how are you guys doing? I'll be fine. I'm okay. I'm in the hospital now, And then UEFA offered this idea of playing the game. Now, I've tried to get in touch with Tim Sparv, who's the captain of the Finnish team. You might remember he was wearing number 14 yesterday, a very tall, statuesque man with a better beard than mine. And I was trying to get in touch with him to find out, what the thoughts with the Finns were, because I know Tim is one of the most moral and genuine people you'll ever meet. And if somebody said to him, this game's not being played, he would have taken his players off. And when the time came to take the players off, he did. He took them off straight away. So they put this to them then. But like you say, what sort of a choice is that to players? And I do think that, it's not Eriksen's choice to make either, really, because I could see it when Martin Braithwaite was getting the ball down in front of me. I've watched this guy for his entire international career. I know what he's like, and he was not right. The way he was running, the way he was making his decisions, the things that I would normally expect him to do weren't happening. The same thing with Simon, the same thing with Mala, the same thing with all these guys. The guys who came in, Andreas Cornelius, the same thing, that everybody was off. And if you remember how dominant they were at the start of the game, the opening 40 minutes or whatever, it was ridiculous how much ball they had. And it's only really coming back to me sort of this morning how they completely fell apart after that. And sure, who could blame them in that situation?
Well, they all are, not to say they all, a number of them would have went into shock and then you're just drained. We've all gone through something traumatic and you feel drained an hour or two afterwards. So, they're sitting around in their sweaty gear and then an hour and 45 minutes they have to go out and somehow get going again. And it's just a very difficult ask. I think Lauder's point, it was no choice at all. I think that's correct. I couldn't have imagined them saying, we need the night. You just, you don't want to be, there's an machismo about the whole thing.
Yeah, I have to say, I always hate to talk about myself in these situations, right? And it's probably the first time that I admitted it was that I was sitting there, my hands were shaking when I was typing these things. I think the story that went out on the Reuters Newswire was eventually updated 9 times because we had new details. We had, the fact he was conscious, so we updated it. And I was typing those things, and I don't know if you're familiar with the way it works, Joe, but these things go into baskets. So it's like, a computer program. And I was trying to put the thing in the basket, and my hands were shaking so badly that they were winding up in baskets to do with commodities trading somewhere on the other side of the world. Because I literally couldn't put them in there. Now, if that's me sitting in the press box doing that, can you imagine how Kasper Schmeichel has to feel, how Seaman Kjaer has to feel, how these guys, Thomas Delaney, had to feel going back in and playing those games. And Delaney was taken off as well, if I'm not mistaken, which is, as I said, it's just beyond the bounds that they would do that. But to put them in that situation then, I think somebody called me from the Reuters TV desk in the middle of it, and they said, well, that's it, the game is over. And I actually said, you never know, with UEFA and, the whole COVID thing and, the games have to be played, and I'm sure you know about the rule where if they have 13 players, at least one of whom is a goalkeeper, they have to play any game. Screw COVID. This has to sort of follow the whole thing, And again, playing it at 12 o'clock today wouldn't have bothered me. I don't think it would have bothered anybody else. But I got to hand it to the Danish Football Association. They got in a team of psychologists and crisis workers straight away. So when the game was over, the team went onto the bus and it would drove back. It takes about, maybe 35, 45 minutes to drive to Helsingør. And they got these people in there and they were there last night and they brought them back again today. So in the sense that anything could be done right in this situation, they have acted in exactly the right way. There's no way, UEFA should have taken down that press conference. There's no way I should have been out there this morning at that hotel. These guys needed that time to be able to get over it. And to work with that then, I don't think... for me, their tournament is now over, right? I can't see how they can recover from this kind of thing because, as I say, the profound effect that it had on me just for a couple of hours, to be standing there over him, not knowing if he's going to live or die while the sheets are taken out and while he's put on a stretcher. Even after that, when he went off to the hospital, that doesn't change what happened initially. As you say, shock is exactly the right word. That's what happens. I was sitting there last night. It was a beautiful summer's day in Copenhagen, a bit windy last night. I was freezing all night. I was freezing the whole night, even after this all happened. And I've been around long enough now to realise what's happening. That's my reaction. And I hate to use the word trauma because, I'm an insignificant part of this.
Sure.
But I had my own little thing to deal with there, right? And again, it matters not a jot what happened to me. I'm there professionally. You deal with these things. But those players to be standing there representing their country and to be more or less shoehorned into that, what do you do? I'm sure they're going to want to go on and play against Belgium, and I'm sure they're going to want to go on and play against Russia. But, it's going to be a momentous task to get these guys back together.
Yes.
And, how do you say, forget about one of the greatest players ever, one of the greatest number 10s ever to play for this country. Forget all that. Forget what happened in the first game. Let's start all over again. So it's going to be really, really difficult for them to do that.
Yeah, very much so. Listen, Philip, we'll check in with you again over the coming days. I'm sure. Philip O'Connor, a journalist at the stadium yesterday. Thanks so much, Philip. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Philip O'Connor there. Football on Off the Ball is with thanks to Paddy Power.